again. Today we've got a really great show. We're going to talk about the combat patches of the United States Army Air Force in World War II. And special thanks to Medals of America and Fountain Inn for providing all the patches, and most especially to Peter Morgan for the use of the patches from his book, Military Patches of the United States. It has all of the patches you're going to see today, plus several hundred more Army Air Force patches among, well, the 5,000 U.S. military patches in the book. By the end of World War II, in 1945, there were 2.8 million Americans serving in the Army Air Corps, and well over 50% of them were deployed in combat overseas. They went from 10,000 airplanes to receiving over 300,000 aircraft from American production facilities. They inflicted losses on the enemy of over 40,000 aircraft. They suffered over 22,000 aircraft losses for various causes on combat sorties. They had the highest losses of officers that you can imagine. Over 50,000 officers and warrant officers were either killed in action, seriously wounded, captured, or still missing in action. And over 68,000 Air Force enlisted personnel were killed in action. Their loss is only second to the infantry. So it was incredible what they performed. And we'll take a look at how each one of those individually numbered air forces contributed to the overall United States Army Air Force in World War II. I think you'll enjoy it. And please, if you enjoy these shows, give us a like, and even better, subscribe. It really, really helps keep us on the air. So, okay, let's go take a look.
Orange and blue patch in the lower left-hand corner was the General Headquarters Air Force patch approved in 1937, and it had 3 impeller blades representing the striking elements of the Air Corps, which were originally organized into 3 wings. In 1942, though, a new patch was approved for the Army Air Force for all personnel assigned to the Army Air Force to wear. It was an ultramarine blue disc representing the sky and the air, and the white star and red disc had been the identifying symbol of U.S. Army airplanes since its inception. The gold wings above the star were a symbol of victory. The patch you see in the center was a sort of like interim before they came out and put the red disc in the center of the star. Just an interesting little sidebar. General Hap Arnold became the commander of the Army Air Force, and in this photograph he is wearing the first military aviator badge issued by the Army in 1913. You don't see that very often. The 1st Air Force was activated at Mitchell Field, New York, in December 1940 as the Northeast Air District. It was redesignated the 1st Air Force in April of 1941. With the outbreak of World War II, the primary mission of the 1st Air Force became the defense of the Atlantic seaboard, an area that included the most populous and highly industrialized centers of the country, as well as an important ocean zone. From December 1941 until the organization of the Army Air Force Anti-Submarine Command in October of 1942, it also engaged in extensive anti-submarine operations. Although active in dispatching combat units to the overseas theater, the 1st Air Force was not free to devote its chief efforts to training until September 1943, when it was relieved from assignment to the Eastern Defense Command. Nevertheless, in the period 1942 to 1944, 350 combat units were activated, trained, or staged at 1st Air Force installations. The 1st Air Force shoulder patch was actually approved in January 1944 and is basically the Army Air Force patch with the numeral 1 representing the unit's designation. Today, the 1st Air Force is located in Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida, with the primary mission of air defense. The 2nd Air Force was activated at McCord Field, Washington, in December of 1940 as the Northwest Air District. It was redesignated the 2nd Air Force in April 1941. At the outset of World War II, the 2nd Air Force functioned as a part of the Western Defense Command and was engaged in West Coast defense. Within a few weeks, however, Its primary responsibility was redefined as carrying out a training mission. And in the 3.5 years preceding Victory in Europe Day, this Air Force sent 14,000 heavy bomber crews to Europe, principally to the 8th and 15th Air Force. At the same time, it not only trained numerous fighter units and bomber and fighter replacements for overseas assignment, but was also engaged in the development of the B-29 program. With the defeat of Germany, its major effort was directed to the training of Super Fortresses crews for the service in Pacific. Today, the 2nd Air Force is responsible for conducting basic military and technical training for Air Force enlisted personnel and non-flying officers. Here is a really personalized 2nd Air Force display case of a flight engineer. He's got his B-29 up in the left-hand corner, a great picture of it. He's gone to a lot of trouble to have his Army Air Force patch done in bullion and his 2nd Air Force patch done in gold bullion. It goes together really well. What a beautifully unique and balanced case for this veteran. The 3rd Air Force, with its kind of unique 3D patch, was activated at MacDill Field, Tampa, Florida, in December 1940 as the Southeast Air District. It was redesignated the 3rd Air Force in April 1941. Between late December 1941 and mid-August 1942, the 3rd Air Force flew more than 1,000 anti-submarine patrol sorties over the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. In addition, it bore responsibility for the defense of the Gulf Coast and stood ready to lend support to the 1st Air Force as long as the eastern United States was in danger of attack. These duties, however, were secondary to its mission as a training unit. During World War II, the operations of the 3rd Air Force expanded far beyond MacDill Air Force Base, included bases in more than a dozen states. By 1945, it trained a total of over 85,000 officers and enlisted men. That was over 20,000 pilots, over 4,000 bombardiers, 9,000 navigators, and about 50,000 various armorer, gunner, mechanics. It was an amazing production. Today, the 3rd Air Force is headquartered in Ramstein Air Base, Germany, and is responsible for all U.S. Air Forces in Europe and Africa. 4th Air Force was activated at Marchfield, California in December 1940 as the Southwest Air District, and it was redesignated as the 4th Air Force in April 1941, and it has a unique and handsome patch. During the early years of World War II, the 4th Air Force, as an air component of the Western Defense Command, was responsible for coastal defenses of the western United States. In this conjunction, it flew patrols and directed anti-aircraft and aircraft warning systems. Decreasing emphasis on its defense mission after relief from assignment to this command in September 1943 enabled the 4th Air Force to concentrate upon training, and soon there were more than 20 bases scattered over 5 states where it prepared heavy bomber crews, twin-engine fighter bomber crews and replacements, engineer aviation battalions, and signal warning units for overseas combat. In addition, it was furnishing instruction in night fighter aircraft and the use of radar. Towards the end of the war, the 4th Air Force also participated in the B-29 program by coordinating with the 20th Air Force organizations in the training of lead crews. Today, the 4th Air Force is a numbered Air Force of the Air Force Reserve Command and is headquartered at March Air Reserve Base, California, and directs the activities and supervises the training of more than 30,000 Air Force reservists. The 5th Air Force was originally activated at Nichols Field in the Philippines in September 1941 as the Philippine Department Air Force. It was redesignated to Far East Air Force in November 1941 and redesignated to 5th Air Force in September 1942. It operated against the Japanese in the Southeast Pacific and made a total of over 400,000 sorties and dropped over 200,000 tons of bombs and claimed over 6,000 Japanese aircraft shot down, as well as losing almost 2,500 aircraft due to enemy actions. Its combat experience was operations in the Philippines, defensive action in Australia, the Netherlands East Indies, the Battle of the Coral Sea, and the transporting of over 15,000 troops across the Stanley Mountains and the subsequent supply by air. And during the Bismarck campaign, the New Guinea campaign, and the other areas leading up to the capture of Okinawa, then flights from Okinawa against the mainland of Japan. The shoulder patch of the 5th Air Force was approved in 1943 and is in the Air Force colors. The smallest stars are in the form of a Southern Cross, which is the area where the force received its baptism of fire. The comet design is taken from the unit's former aircraft markings, and the 3 trails of the comet represent bombers, fighters, and troop carriers. Today, the 5th Air Force is a numbered Air Force of the United States Air Force Pacific Air Forces. Its headquarters at Yokota Air Force Base, Japan, and is the United States Air Force oldest continuously serving numbered Air Force. The 6th Air Force was activated in February 1942 with headquarters at Albrook Field Balboa Canal Zone, and basically it was the Panama Canal Zone Air Force, flying defensive or anti-submarine patrols out into the Atlantic, but especially in the Caribbean. The shoulder patch is in the colors of the Army Air Force, and the galleon is suggestive of exploration and discovery, and is appropriate of the spirit of the Air Force, which is symbolized by the winged star. The 6 sides of the patch represent the unit's designation. The United States Air Force Southern Command patch shown on the right is an inactive Major Command of the United States Air Force, and it was headquartered at Albrook Air Force Base. The 7th Air Force was established in 1940 as a Hawaiian Air Force at Fort Schaefer in the territory of Hawaii. The 7th Air Force provided air defense for the Hawaiian Islands and then engaged in combat operations in the Central Pacific, where it would hit enemy forces in the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, and also the last major battle of the Pacific War, the Battle of Okinawa. And then it returned to the defense of Hawaii after the war. And just as a side note, the 7th Air Force became the primary U.S. Air Force command and control organization in South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. The 7th Air Force patch is a rather clever design. The star is the representation of the Army Air Forces, and the Arabic numeral 7 is the unit's designation. Today, the 7th Air Force is part of the United States Pacific Air Forces and is currently headquartered at Osan Air Base in South Korea. The 8th Air Force, the mighty 8th Air Force, was activated in Savannah, Georgia in January 1942 and been reassigned to England, where it became part of the American-British air offense against Germany. By December of 1944, the 8th Air Force was capable of sending out 2,000 heavy bombers and 1,000 fighter planes in a day, or a force of over 21,000 men on a single mission. By VE Day, the 8th had destroyed over 20,000 enemy aircraft and had flown over 1 million flights, with nearly 333,000 of those by heavy bombers. As a reward for its incredible fighting, the 8th was transferred to the Pacific Theater and established headquarters at Okinawa, but really didn't have much of a chance to fight the Japanese since they surrendered on August 15, 1945. The colors of the 8th Air Force are the Army Air Force colors, and the wing star is representing the Army Air Force, and the Arabic numeral 8 indicates the unit's designation. Here's a great display of an aerial gunner who served with the 8th Air Force. He has both his aerial gunner wings and his aircrew wings. His 5 air medals displayed along with some commemorative medals. But just what a wonderful display that honors his service in the 8th Air Force. Today, the 8th Air Force is part of the United States Air Force's Air Force Global Strike Command and is headquarters at Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. The 9th Air Force, with 2 variations of its patches shown here, fought in World War II in both the Western Desert Campaign in Egypt and Libya, as well as the tactical fighter component of the United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, engaging the enemy forces in France, the Low Country, and Nazi Germany. By VE Day in May of 1945, the 9th had destroyed 9,400 enemy aircraft with a loss of over 6,000 planes to enemy action. It had over 650,000 sorties and it dropped over 500,000 tons of bombs on enemy targets. The star in the patch represents the United States Army Air Force, and the Wing 9 indicates the unit's designation. Today, the 9th Air Force is headquartered at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina. Here is a really unique display case of a former aerial gunner in the 9th Air Force. He's got his aerial gunner wings, his air crew wings. You'll notice that he has a special triangular badge with a bomb on it. I'll tell you about that a little later. Over on the right is his German Stalag tag, because he's got even his Caterpillar Club card showing that he had to hit the silk and bail out. And he has his Prisoner of War medal. A unique display of an airman who was shot down, captured, and survived. If you want to know more information about United States Air Force medals and ribbons, our latest book covers everything from, well, the Army Air Service in 1909 up to today. It's available for you on Amazon. If you order it today, you'll probably have it by this weekend. The 10th Air Force was a combat air force created for operations in India, Burma, and Indochina during World War II. The 10th Air Force and other Allied air units were responsible for absolutely destroying the Japanese air arms in India and the Burma theaters and flew thousands of sorties against the enemy. The colors on the patch are those of the Army Air Force, and the number 10 indicates the unit's numerical designation. Today, the 10th Air Force is part of the Air Force Reserve Command and is headquartered at Naval Air Station Fort Worth Joint Reserve Base. The 11th Air Force was established in 1941 as the Alaskan Air Force at Elmendorf Field, Alaskan Territory. It was initially part of the United States Army Air Force, and it provided air defense for Alaska during World War II and fought in the Aleutian Islands campaign. The 11th made over 7,000 offensive combat sorties and dropped over 4,000 tons of bombs on enemy targets and destroyed 113 enemy aircraft during the course of the war. Today, it is part of the numbered air forces of the United States Air Force Pacific Air Force and is headquartered at Joint Base Elmendorf, Richardson, Alaska. The 12th Air Force was activated at Bowling Field in Washington, D.C., and on your left you see an original design for the 12th Air Force patch and then the final design on the right. The 12th Air Force participated in the initial invasion of French Morocco and Algiers, and in the first several months shot down over 400 enemy aircraft. It continued to fight throughout North Africa along with the RAF and engaged in the Mediterranean and Western Europe, especially in Italy, and provided support at Anzio and to Mark Clark's Fifth Army as it moved up the Italian peninsula. Today, the 12th Air Force is part of the Air Force Combat Command and is headquartered at its base in Arizona. The 13th Air Force was a combat air force that was activated in New Caledonia and was deployed in the Pacific Theater in World War II. It engaged primarily in operations in the South Pacific, attacking enemy forces in the Solomon Islands, the Gilbert and the Marshall Island campaigns, as well as fighting with the 5th Air Force. The 13th Air Force destroyed over 1,400 enemy aircraft, but also lost over 650 of its own planes to the enemy. It remained in the Philippines as part of a Far East Air Force after the war and was credited with participating in 11 World War II campaigns. The 13th Air Force was part of the United States Air Force Pacific and was last headquartered at Hickams Air Force Base on the island of Hawaii. The 14th Air Force was activated in March of 1943 in Kunming, China, and replaced the famous Flying Tigers. In one of its very first strikes against Japanese forces in Formosa, it destroyed over 50 enemy aircraft without losing a single plane. The Flying Tiger on the 14th patch was taken from the Flying Tigers, but there was never any official connection between the Flying Tigers and the 14th Air Force. But many members of the American Volunteer Group were commissioned and assigned to the 23rd Fighter Group, which was one of the original units of the 14th. And the use of the Flying Tigers on the shoulder patch was authorized to honor these airmen. Here is a unique display case of a pilot from the 14th Air Force displaying both his Army Aviator wings and the Chinese Air Force wings, as well as a Chinese medal that was struck to commemorate their service during World War II. 14th Air Force then became a numbered Air Force of the United States Air Force Space Command and was headquartered at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. The 15th Air Force was activated in November of 1943 in Tunisia and was initially established as a heavy bombardment group, and it was designed to fill in the Mediterranean theater of operations to complete the strategic encirclement of Germany and her satellites. During World War II, the 15th was credited with flying over 250,000 sorties and dropped over 300,000 tons of bombs. It destroyed over 6,000 enemy aircraft, and it suffered over 3,000 planes lost due to enemy action. Today, the 15th Air Force is part of the United States Air Combat Command and is headquartered at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. The 15th was reactivated on 20 August 2020 to consolidate units of the 9th Air Force and the 12th Air Force to form a new numbered Air Force responsible for generating and presenting the Air Combat Command's conventional forces. And just so you know, shoulder patches also exist for the 16th and 18th Air Force, but it's extremely doubtful if either of those was ever worn or intended for unit use. Both of those units were organized after the Air Force had discontinued wearing shoulder patches in 1947. However, there may be some insignia out there that were made for the movies or for collectors, just so you know. The 20th Air Force was established in April 1944 and originally operated from bases in India and staging through bases in China and conducted strategic bombardment of the Japanese home islands. It relocated to the Mariana Islands in late 44 and continued the strategic bombing campaign against Japan until Japanese capitulation in August of 1945. The 509th Composite Group of the 20th Air Force conducted the atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, and they are the only unit in the Air Force to have ever used nuclear weapons in combat. Today, the 20th Air Force is part of the Air Force Global Strike Command, and its current headquarters is at Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. Here is a really great example of an Army Air Force Senior NCO uniform, and you can see over on his left sleeve he has the Army Air Force patch, and on the right sleeve he has his combat patch, the 15th Air Force. But hey, what's that blue triangle down on his right sleeve? Well, it's a communication specialist patch, a tower between four flashes, and let me show you those. In 1943, the Army Air Force approved distinctive sleeve patches for technical specialists as shown by these blue triangles. In the upper left was the engineering specialist, then to the right of that was a communication specialist. The two to the right of that was a weather specialist. Then on the bottom, starting at the left, was a photography specialist. And then on the right was an armament specialist, the drop bomb. Three other kind of interesting and unique unauthorized insignia. Starting on your left was a flying boot for airmen who had had to parachute from their aircraft when it was shot down. Then in the flying fish was for an airman who had parachuted into the water and had been rescued. And then the unofficial combat crew patch. It was sort of like to rub it in to people who weren't.
Thank you for joining us today for our show on the United States Army Air Force combat patches of World War II. I hope you enjoyed it. I think you'll remember the patch that's on this navigator's sleeve. And the Air Force is still using all of these patches in one form or another. I think I've showed you some examples of that. Once again, special thanks to Peter Morgan for the information from his book, United States Military Patches. And thank you for watching. And I hope you share this with other folks. And remember, if you enjoyed it, please give us a like, even better, subscribe. It really helps us out. And see you next time on Veterans Medals Workshop.